Welcome back to Seeking the Truth About the Sword of Truth. My name is Tom, and I will be your guide as we spend this episode exploring Chapter 17 of Wizard's First Rule. In our last episode, Richard and Kahlan were woken up in the middle of the night because of some trouble with some quad members. Later on, Adie gives them both the business until Richard does some shirtless woodcutting in her backyard. If you haven't read this series yet and you intend to, I'd encourage you to read these books first because these videos contain spoilers, heavy spoilers. Why don't you take a look, see what you think about them, and then come back. Spoiler alert, the things that make me feel connected to these characters are the things I want to feel connected to inside myself. At the beginning of this chapter, best estimates place the time since the beginning of Wizard's First Rule on the evening of the 8th day. There are an estimated number of 197 apples left in Richard's backpack, and the estimated number of people killed by Richard's hand is 1. We begin the chapter as Richard enjoys the quiet sounds of the evening as he thinks about how in just one more step he'll be the furthest away from home he's ever been, in a moment of soul-searching that would give Samwise Gamgee a run for his money. He also thinks about the irony of following in his father's footsteps. By leaving Westland to take the Book of Counted Shadows, he got back into the Midlands. Richard says, "Adie, how are we supposed to know to believe we are in the past or the boundary?" And Adie says, "Well, Richard, you better start believing you can believe you're in the past because you're in one." Perfect. I had to think for a long time before I could come up with an idea that explains the symbolism of the opening scene of this chapter. I'm not sure if I'm onto something with this or not, but I really like how it sounds. For this explanation, I'll use the same symbolism from earlier in the series where magic represents our ability to learn more about the rules of humanity and how we can interact with others in a way that makes us feel connected and growing instead of making us feel hurting and isolated. There are all kinds of magic in the world, but George Cypher doesn't have the gift, and he doesn't know anything about magic. George represents our own mothers, fathers, and strong role models of our youth. George represents someone who loves us and cares about us, and even though George doesn't have any magic of his own, just by being there in our lives, he can take the one little piece of magic he learns over the course of an entire life and try to pass that little bit of magic on. Think about that one person in your life that really tried their best for you. It can be a friend or a family member, but it's important that you feel like they gave you something important. Think about which quality or qualities they had which really struck home with you. For me, it was my dad's patience and compassion. I didn't see him as much as I was around my mother, who was the opposite of those things, but he was always there to try and help with the damage she was causing while it was happening. Even though the courts got it very wrong and kept the wrong parent from having control over the children involved, his love and patience for others was his Book of Counted Shadows, which he gave me to read. Every time he was watching over me, I didn't know it at the time, but just by being next to him, I was the one reading and copying the pages over and over again until it felt like I couldn't forget a single word, even if I tried. When I think about it that way, the father's journey to the Midlands to bring back magic to teach to Richard, I think about a parent who started life as someone who was born trapped inside of all the same problems and insecurities that we face. And then, when I think about finding them their own path into the Midlands, the realm beyond where their rational mind was able to go without the reason and rationale to balance the instincts and emotions which had gotten them so far, the parent gives what they know in the only way they know how. And if the kid has enough trust, they can use what they were given to make it beyond their own limitations and go and discover other kinds of magic on their own. The part of me that wishes I had that from both of my parents is also incredibly grateful to have gotten it from one of them. That same part of me wonders what wonderful books of magic other people's parents and role models have brought back with them, and what lessons they were trying to teach anyone before they were trying to teach lessons to their kids before they ran out of time and wouldn't be around anymore. What stories did your parents let you read? Richard says that solves the problem of finding the past. What do we do? And what do we need to know to make it through? Adie points to the bones on her walls and says there are beasts inside which hunt the living. She says the beasts are also confused by the bones. They become blind to Adie because they mistake her for one of them. Richard uses his powers of deductive reasoning to deduce that taking some of the underworld bones might confuse the beast trying to get them and hide them the way that they hide 80. In an article written by Project Learning Tree titled 32 Examples of Camouflage in Nature, one of the types of camouflage explored is self-decoration. Self-decoration is when an animal or insect takes other things from nature and builds a disguise out of them. Some kinds of turtles do this by letting moss grow on their shells, making them harder to see. Sea urchins gather rocks and shells and even little tiny hats made by aquarium workers to help them blend in with their surroundings. And PETA uses mud and other things to disguise himself as part of the forest in the Hunger Games. By decorating themselves with the bones of the underworld beasts, they're able to look different than they really are and can pass by them without being spotted. Symbolically, this is how many people get through daily life. There's no shortage of situations where blatantly honest, integrity, pride, or self-reliance will make a person an easy target. What the author is saying is that it's good to be strong on the inside and carry that strength around. He's also saying that it does no good to present that strength all the time because you'll attract situations like the red-haired man in South Haven, where the very act of existing publicly that way forces an uncomfortable internal conversation, ending with them thinking the problem must be you, and I'm going to make sure you know it. Sometimes it's wiser to let others think you're weak, so that when you need to be strong, you can do so with the element of surprise on your side. For most of us, it's as simple as knowing the time and the place for a proper conversation about religion or politics. When the time is good for learning and growth, it's time to shine. When swimming in the valley of drowning fools, it's best not to let them know you can float if you aren't ready for them to try and drag you down to pull themselves up. Addie says, while they are traveling through the past, they can't have horses or stop to rest, and that wandering off the trail is just asking for trouble. Addie says there are other things inside the past which are also dangerous and uses the strongest warning possible to explain it. She says if they stop too long, those things will get them. 80 tells them that she goes into the past often, and with a bit of care, it's a safe place to travel. But one day she got tired and thought it was safe to take a nap next to a tree. When she woke up, she had a giant armored roly-poly wrapped around her ankle, slowly sucking the blood out of her. Since it had roly-polied itself around her ankle, the armor on its back was the only thing she could reach, and there was no way to pull it off. Remember the symbolism of what the boundary represents. The boundary line in our minds is where we have decided something is always or never true. We've gone over countless examples of how people react when asked to go against these beliefs. It almost never goes well. Pick one of those moments from the past few chapters which show a person go from rational to irrational to completely irrational and confrontational in a matter of moments. Notice how there is no coming back for them once that line is crossed. That is what it means to take the past through the boundary. The knowledge still exists and is accessible to their mind. It's just hidden and secret, hiding behind twists and turns of many layers of belief, which make reaching that idea a dangerous task. Addie says it's safe enough if you know the dangers. The only real danger is a lack of honesty about the world and a lack of honesty about the self. It's easy to believe that some people don't deserve empathy based on their actions, and that somehow recognizing that a human being feels the same pain as another human being, whether they're right or wrong, doesn't mean agreeing with them and their actions or ideas. It's also easy to believe once a person checks a certain number of boxes in a certain way that there's no coming back for them, ever. And that doesn't stop a lot of otherwise rational people from doing just that. But that's not the most honest way of looking at things. Deciding to treat an asshole the way they feel like you deserve they should be treated is only deciding it's okay to be an asshole if you feel like it. They're already doing the same thing and aren't much different in that sense. But regardless of the intent behind the acts of assholery, there is one fact which does not change. If the goal is to try and change the problem to a better solution, hostility and aggression from you won't succeed any more than they will when they do it to you. If the goal is not to take it upon yourself and fix that problem, then not engaging is the best course of action, because then at least the problem isn't fed by having someone fight against it. That only gives them validation and makes them fight harder, strengthening them and making it worse. If the goal is to be an asshole, then most people don't need to do anything differently than they've already done in this situation. Treat a person like they don't deserve human kindness. You'll produce a creature that doesn't know human kindness when you do that. Get ready for some science here. And I like to put on my science hat, but I use the same hat for everything, and it's a quality hat. So bathonyms can be divided into giant species when they're adults, and generally they are between 8 and 15 centimeters. So a bathonym is those roly-polies that I was talking about, the little ones that curl up in a ball and roll away when you poke them when you're too little to know that it's actually terrifying and not a fun thing for them to do. Anyways, the long and supergiant species of this, adults have been known to grow between 15 and 50 centimeters. So that's 6.7 inches and 19.7 inches. And this is not to scale. Do not think that any of this is not 19.7 inches. This might be 19.7 inches, but you can't prove that, and really neither can I. So just demonstration only. Demonstration only. They also have a thick armored shell on the back that they can use for protection, and they just roll up into a ball. They have hooked legs that they use to grab onto things, and 4 pairs of jaws. This is the real world. I'm not talking about grippers. Normally, their diet consists of plant matter, which is decaying or has already dead and is starting to decompose. Addie uses her axe to try and get the gripper off of her ankle because she knows it's killing her, but the armor around its back is too strong to remove in that way. In a moment of self-reflection, Addie talks about how angry this made her to realize she had been caught by one of the slowest and most easily avoided creatures in the past. She calls herself a sleeping fool. In a moment of incredible honesty, she says when she could stand the pain of it no longer, there was only one thing she could do to save her life. She uses her axe to chop off her foot and ankle. The gripper that Addie has around her ankle, sucking the lifeblood out of her. I'd wager the lifeblood the author is symbolizing here is humanity. A person can let that thing wrap around themselves, but leaving it on for too long will kill empathy, honesty, and humanity, leaving nothing of value left behind, except, as Addie puts it, an old fool who is less of a person for it. Addie's description of this is what it feels like for a person to hold on to their desire, to separate people into groups of good and evil and hand out empathy based on which certain boxes are checked to make sure they deserve it first. The gripper is slow because this type of behavior comes from the self. No one can make a decision for anyone else about who they will choose to give their humanity to. The gripper lives within the pass of the boundary because it is one of the things a person must overcome if they are ever truly going to make it through the pass. Addie says she was sleeping while it happened because it is a completely natural feeling which can creep up on a person who isn't watching carefully for it. Finally, once the gripper is on there is nothing good left in the spot it is latched onto. The pain she is talking about is the pain it causes the self to hate others. As easy as it is to see it feels right to treat people the way we think they deserve to be treated, especially when that decision leads to a lack of basic human decency, is exactly how difficult it is to see the pain it causes when we do that to ourselves. The body only has 2 choices at that point. It can remove the part of itself that is hurting, or it can destroy the thing which feels the hurt. The thing which feels the hurt, that hurt inside us, is our empathy, our compassion, and our humanity. Once a person is treated as though they aren't even human, it becomes easy to lose sight of the parts of the self that are lost when this happens. It's one of the meanings of the wizard's unwritten rule, and the meaning is fought the hardest by the most people, strength without hate. And it's rooted in the same thing that makes us hurt each other when we really wish we could be making a difference instead. Hate feels strong. It's easy to mistake that strong feeling for strength. But it's a false strength that burns the one holding it far more than it burns the one receiving it. That is why Addie is willing to chop off her foot. All she is doing is being honest about her choices. It's better to painfully remove that which will eventually kill us than it is to fear that pain and be dead inside already. Both Kahlan and Richard recognize the incredible amount of grit it would take to do such a thing on purpose, and they stop to give Addie comfort. She tells them it's not their sympathy she's concerned about, it's their education. She tells them confidence and fear are like sheets of paper. There are 2 sides, and neither of them are good or bad, they just are. It's up to us to decide when confidence and fear are good and when they're bad. Finally, she talks about the most dangerous part of the pass. At the halfway point, when the walls of the boundary get very close together and almost touch, it's called the Narrows. She says the Narrows is within the center of a large rock the side of Adie's house, and warns them that they will want to go around it, but there is only death to be found by trying to avoid that part of the path. Addie says, while passing through the Narrows, the dead will be calling to them to try and convince them to step into the boundary, and the temptation will be strong to listen to them. The lesson here is that the path to this part of the mind goes right through the parts of the mind that are the most dangerous to us. The apparent contradictions we see when a thing feels one way and we know it acts another. It's easy to look at things from an outside perspective, but once it's there in front of you, the things it conjures can be very difficult to ignore. The Narrows is different for everyone because we all have different access to different truths we've discovered along the way. It doesn't mean the things we think are true. That list is usually long and it's very unreliable, just as described by the wizard's first rule. Just because we think something's true, of course, doesn't mean it is true. In fact, I can't say one thing we know everything about with absolute certainty. Can you? I'm talking about the times when we do our best to get through life. We guess at one of life's lessons, and we happen to get it right, and things improve as a result. My own personal Narrows was feelings of resentment, anger, and hatred for the way my mother abused me when I was too young to protect myself from it. I was on a path for a long time into that boundary. I learned a lot about logic and myself and how sometimes when I was trying to do a good thing for myself, it ended up being a bad thing that hurt me instead. Slowly, I made progress, but I always stopped at the Narrows and was unable to pass through it. There's a specific reason the Narrows is described as a boulder the size of Addie's house. Addie is a representation of honesty. Honesty to the world as we see it, and the ability to see ourselves as we are. The reason the path goes through the middle and that veering off to the side to go around it is death is because total honesty in both of those areas is necessary to pass through. I couldn't pass through because I was only being honest with what I saw in the world. I wasn't being very honest with myself. I kept telling myself that feeling strongly about hating her was giving me strength. Honestly, the opposite was true. The stronger I felt that I needed to be in control of who gets to have feelings of pain and who doesn't, the weaker I became. When I realized the hatred was hurting me, like it was hurting Addie, and I chopped that part of myself off, it was scary, and it hurt like hell. But the pain wasn't coming from doing it. The pain was coming from the thing that was being torn and removed from my body as it tried to hang on. There is symbolism of passing through the Narrows and also the symbolism behind why Addie chopped off her foot. It connects with people because the part of them that needs to be healed knows the truth of it and tries to connect to it wherever it finds it, hoping we will notice and act on it. I'm going to ask a question that will sound familiar, but should also sound different based on how I'm framing it. The way I understand things like this is when I ask myself, did the story of Addie cutting off her foot and the story of Richard and Kahlan's trip through the Narrows speak to me? If I read those sections of the book and it made me feel something, once I go beyond the story and the characters, what is it about those scenes in that particular way that made me feel connected to them? I know that now, why I felt that way and have put it into words. But what I see is only what I see. What about you? What do you see when you read the story of the Narrows and listen to the story of Addie chopping off her foot and try to apply that to self-improvement and things which are holding you back? I'd like to know. Richard says, Addie, you aren't going to believe this, but Chase said that the boundary is failing. And if I'm to believe that, how can I believe it's still safe to go through the Narrows? And Addie says, Richard, you aren't going to believe this, but it's never safe to go through the Narrows. And just like in the never-ending story, when Atreus seeks the Southern Oracle, he has to pass through the pair of sphinxes, where the first one shoots lasers and the second gate is a magic mirror that reveals one's true nature. The Narrows of the boundary will shoot emotional laser beams and reveal the nature of the person who is passing through. She tells Richard that she has seen many people go through the pass, but they all got laser beamed before they made it through the other side because they didn't have the chops. Addie also lets everyone know that so long as the boundary is there, the pass must be there as well, and says so long as they help each other, they should be able to make it through to the other side. Addie lets loose an important piece of information about the boundary while she describes the Narrows when she says that so long as the boundary is there, there must be a pass as well. This is the first symbolism of hope we get associated with the boundary. The symbolism behind the boundary has been mostly all gloom and doom up to this point, and touching it meant to represent death to the rational mind and a loss of free will. The boundary is meant to represent what happens to us when we think these strong feelings are a source of strength, and all of that is true. But that doesn't mean the boundary needs to be the end of it. So long as the boundary exists, the past must exist as well. Finding this one relatable is harder to see in someone else, so I'll turn the example inwards and hope some of you know what I'm talking about. Now, if you've always gotten everything right on the first try, or you never had to learn anything that was painful, or apologize for anything, or grow in love, maturity, or compassion, or find that a different point of view was better than one you currently had, well, then I can't help you with this one, but chances are if you have all those things going for you, you really don't need much help, do you? For everyone else, going through the Narrows is when you realize you've believed something that wasn't true. That is why the rock is the size of Addie's house. That is why the only path that works is through it. Then we get to one of the most confusing and dumbfounding questions that I've been able to find in the entire Sword of Truth series. Richard asks, "You said the Narrows were at the center of the pass. Won't it be night? How will we be able to stay on the trail and see?" And Addie doesn't seem to have a problem with this because she has this fancy old nightstone that is just lying around collecting dust. Am I the only person who has a hard time with this scene? Because I have at least two serious problems here. First, what about torches? Did everybody all of a sudden forget about the existence of torch technology? I could forgive Addie for not having any spare torches lying around. A blind person doesn't need torches, but Richard and Kahlan would know about them. And even if they somehow never encountered torches in their entire lives, they would have first seen them during Zed's performance of the 50-man Westland Kaskrati Choir at his house. And they were at the supply shop in South Haven. I'm very worked up about this. Bill doesn't mention Addie is blind and says a lot of people there don't go to see her out of superstition. Frankly, I guess that would mean she doesn't see anybody. It's entirely possible Bill, while gathering random common supplies as a person might need while they were living near the boundary, would include several torches as part of the supplies he sent with Richard and Kahlan as well, especially since he was more or less given a blank check to gather said supplies because the government was paying the bill. And even if Bill didn't include any torches, we know for a fact from the words of the text that Addie has access to all of the materials necessary to make torches. The wood comes from the firewood Richard cuts for her. The cloth is readily available and plentiful, especially in the amount it would take to make a torch. And the fuel for said torches in the lantern oil inside the lantern Richard interacts with in her house in the beginning of the chapter. And even if all of that failed, why, please, for the love of the great creator in the sky, while demonstrating excellent temporal reasoning skills by pointing out that they will arrive at the most dangerous part of the journey in the middle of the night, why do they decide to leave Addie's house to go through the pass at the exact moment that will make them arrive at the most dangerous spot in the middle of the night? Most likely during a rainstorm due to the clouds keeping Richard hidden from the tracer cloud. Addie is very pleased to have finally found the right use for her nightstone and transfers ownership of it to Richard of her own free will. It's a black rock, and she says when a person has great need enough, they can take it out and it will give off light. She says it only works for the owner and only works if the person gave it to the last person of their own free will. She also mentions that the wizard will be able to use it to find them once he wakes up because he has the magic to find them. Richard doesn't feel comfortable taking Addie's glowing rock, and Addie tells him that everything has value in the right circumstance, and many things are more trouble in the wrong place and time. You can't drink gold and you can't add enough water to a situation to prevent someone from drowning. She does tell him that if he feels strongly about this, he can give it back to her someday, and she never sees her nightstone again, ever. It gets destroyed along with all of the other good intentions Richard has to return Emma's clothing and Chase's borrowed knife. The Nightstone is meant to represent true honesty. What she means is when a person needs it the most, they can use it to light the way, but only if the previous owner gave it to them of their own free will. In this case, the previous owner is our own sense of honesty, and that guiding light can only be produced when the source of the light, the stone, is given by the free will of the previous owner. It's a different way of representing the heart of the wizard's 13th rule, which says you cannot change the nature of humanity by force, violence, or imprisonment. That means you can't force another person to be honest with themselves any more than you can force them to choose anything they don't agree to choose. Their consent can be violated, but it can never be taken. The ownership always belongs to the individual, and they must be the one to willingly give that honest guiding light to themselves. Otherwise, there's no power behind it. Addie also says the wizard has magic to find it. As alone as people may feel in the world, there are others out there, more than you might think, who are hiding behind their own bones of underworld beasts. They know the truth behind the power of compassion, connection, honesty, integrity, and strength. And when that light of honesty shines, it is something they can instantly recognize as good when they see it. Being honest with yourself makes you shine brightly to the people who are always honest with themselves. And if you ever need help, those are the people who will want to be there for you. Those are the people you need because they have already been where you are trying to go. Addie gives Kahlan a good bone necklace that reminds her of the bone necklace Addie gave her mother. She says that nothing keeps a person hidden from the beasts of the underworld like a nice bone necklace. Richard is feeling left out and says, "Hey, what about me? Can I get some boning around here?" And Addie says, "You lovable scamp, you need no bone, Heartlander. The beasts cannot see you." Richard realizes Addie can see his bone. Even though the woman is blind in both eyes and it's safely hidden under his clothing, from her point of view, Richard's bone may as well have been 10 feet long. Addie then reaches out and lightly touches her fingers to Richard's bone. Richard really doesn't know what to do with Addie paying so much attention to his secret bone. And Richard thinks that's pretty cool, I guess, but he realizes that the bone his father gave him must be the same kind of bone that was guarding the secret book of Counted Shadows. Finally, Addie gets the hint when she sees Richard trying really hard not to show any emotion, and she lets the whole thing drop faster than a broken bone necklace over the top rail of a really tall staircase. You're not going to believe this. I'm strategically using the word bone to make what is described here in the book sound like there is some shenanigans going on here with Richard's bone necklace. The word bone is implying penis. This entire bit was constructed to suggestively isolate the word bone as much as possible. Bone. And if any of you were already thinking this before I spilled the beans, then you should be ashamed of yourself. She's old enough to be his grandmother, and Kahlan is right there in the room with him. They're just necklaces. Jeez. The only new bit of symbolism here that hasn't been covered already in the chapter is surrounding the beast guarding the Book of Counted Shadows. When you imagine the symbolism of George going through the boundary as a parent and bringing back some small bit of magic for his son, something that he touched or learned about what it means to be human and also about being alive, then it would make sense to see that gain of knowledge, he would also have had to go through something dangerous as well. The beast represents the guards and threats which convince us we have no choices in our lives except the ones we feel. And the only way to get past that limitation is to defeat the monster guarding the knowledge. Accepting the possibility of the mind being a much more expansive and powerful tool is the first and most difficult step. George was able to take that journey, and he used it to help his son learn something relatively quickly, even though it took him a lifetime to figure out. Once Addie is finished fiddling with bones, she tells everyone to sleep now and she goes to lay down, but not before offering the use of her bed to her guests. Neither of them wants to impose, and they agree to use their sleeping bags on the floor in front of a nice romantic fire. Richard looks at his friends and knows he needs to go on without them. And he worries that the smartest man he knows might actually have had a good idea of what to do when they make it into the Midlands. He's also afraid of not having his friends there to make him feel better about being in a strange and new place. When the rain comes down, Kahlan's mind is completely on her mission while she stares at the ceiling and fiddles with her necklace. Richard looks at Kahlan laying stretched out on the floor, idly staring off into space, thinking deep Mother Confessor thoughts. The flickering firelight dances across the walls and ceiling, casting all sorts of red and orange-flavored shadows across her, while the rain gently pours itself outside, turning the entire world into a soothing white noise machine, punctuated only by the occasional crackle and pop from the warm fire next to them. Despite all of the very real problems he is facing, Richard can't help but be distracted by Kahlan's femininity. And it's all he can do to agree with her when she says she's sorry for having to leave his friends behind and hopes Richard won't think she made him do it. Richard is honest with her and with himself when he says she was right about that. There isn't much time, and he won't be mad at her for telling the truth. And while his words say, you, Kahlan, of all these things are the most important, his mind says, hey, that's a pretty sweet-looking neck you've got there. Someday I'm going to get you. Nom, 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 nom. Here's what I think the author means when he talks about these things. This whole chapter has been sort of a guidebook about the different things a person needs to make sure they have before they try and open their mind to the other side of something they never thought about for. First, you need integrity to provide stability in who you are. A stable core that knows what is and what is not. Second is one of the trickier bits, total honesty with what the world is and what your part in it is. That is where the ability to separate what feels right comes from, and why 80 resonates so strongly as a character in the series. People recognize this and see her value. Third is a strong sense of justice to power everything, which is kept on target with the guidance of integrity and honesty, like a very heavy wagon. Justice is the horse that powers the wagon forward. Integrity is the strength of the wagon, that it does not come apart when the wagon hits a bump or a dip in the road. Honesty is what chooses the direction the horse will go and makes sure it stays on the right path. The Nightstone is a symbolic stand-in for Addie, a little blind portable sorceress symbol of honesty. It doesn't tell you what to do, it only lights the way, and the person decides what that means. Without justice to pull the wagon, it doesn't matter how well the course is plotted or how strong the wagon is. Getting out there and trying to push it won't work very well. Without honesty to steer it, a strong wagon can drive for a while with the horse pulling it, but it won't know where it's going. And the horse gets to decide. So long as the horse makes good choices, things can work out for the drive without a driver for a while. But eventually something is going to take that horse off track and the wagon will be pulled along with it. Without integrity to make the wagon strong, the best driver and the strongest horse will quickly break the wagon apart, making the journey impossible if there is anything of value to be carried inside that wagon. And to tie it all together, Richard and Kahlan have a strong bond where one needs to be attached to the other. The horse needs the wagon to go anywhere. The horse and the wagon can survive for a time without a good driver, but a horse without a wagon doesn't need a driver at all, nor does a wagon without a horse. Richard asked Kahlan's what that different language stuff was about when Addie was giving Kahlan her bone necklace. And Katie says it's nice to talk about giving a thing to her kid to protect it, but if she's being honest with herself, she doesn't think she's going to live long enough to have kids, because that's what she was talking about with 80. And if anyone has been paying attention at all in these novels, they would have good reason to agree with her. She almost dies a lot. So does Richard. Kahlan says better people than her have tried to help, and they've all failed. She doesn't see how they have a better chance than they did, only that if they don't try, they'll have a 0% chance of staying alive instead of the almost 0% chance they have of staying alive right now. Richard does the only thing the symbol for integrity can do, and that is to double down on what he knows is right. He's honest about their chances and the problems they face. He recognizes he used his own free will to accept the position of seeker along with the sword of truth, and says that even if it kills him, he will give every ounce of himself to make sure that Dark and Raw killing him means wounding him so badly that he kills himself. And that is the Richard Cipher guarantee. Kahlan seems to appreciate the justice of a clearly executed double kill, and tells Richard that she made him feel better just by getting her to look at things in a different way. The symbolism here is straightforward. It's tough to grow emotionally as a human being. The things we need to accept about ourselves and others have the ability to cause a perfectly rational and compassionate human being to descend into what can only be described as insanity. Humanity is abandoned. Compassion is lost. Hate is justified. Richard, as the symbol for integrity, it says, all of this is true, and I only have the things I really need to stand up against it. I have my own free will to decide what to do, and I have the truth to tell me what needs to be, and the willingness to try and find out. There is also meaning in what he says about taking Dark and Rawl down with them if he manages to kill them. It's possible for a person to abuse their senses of integrity, justice, and honesty so much that they die. Addie loses a foot and can still get around, but she could lose her head and that would be the end of it. If a person has a battle going on inside them, between the part of them that wants to be honest and compassionate and the part of them that wants to pick and choose what treatment is okay for some humans that deserve it, and that part of them is successful at killing those things inside them, then the battle is over. It's possible to win, and there are examples of this everywhere you look. You can find many still fighting that war within themselves, but you can also find people that have lost the war completely, and there is nothing left inside them. There is no hope. There's no humanity. There's no compassion. They're dead inside. And so they win the battle by killing the thing that fights against it, but they lose the war by losing everything which makes them human. The next morning, Richard and Kahlan get ready to leave, and he gives the sorceress a message for Chase. He tells her to go on and get the army whipped up into shape, to apologize to his brother for not seeing him before he had to leave, and to tell his brother that he loves him. He also says if his brother's being an asshole and not listening, to take matters into his own hands and make sure the Daharan army doesn't roll over everyone without a fight first. If he can do all those things, then he can come back and meet up with Richard later. Adie says, no prob, Bob. What about the wizard friend? And Richard says, Zed's smart enough not to need a bunch of words to know what he should do, and likely knows from previous interactions that telling Zed what to do would be a waste of time anyways, because he always does what he thinks is right. So Richard decides on a short message of, sorry we couldn't wait, catch up when you can, and if everything goes perfect when you use the magic rock to find us, you'll find us with the Box of Orden. Adie says she can handle that, wishes the Seeker of Truth some strength, and says buckle up because he's about to see some serious shit. Richard's advice is good advice for practical reasons, and also another unintentional piece of information that Michael really should have had to work harder at finding. When Chase shows up to give him Richard's message, imagine that scene from Michael's perspective. Chase shows up, or even better, he sends a letter which says, here's a message from Richard Cipher. Dear Michael, I'm sorry about not getting to catch up with you after how things ended at the party. You'll always be my brother and I'll always love you. It's because I love you that I have to leave the Heartland Woods behind and travel through the boundary into the Midlands. It will be dangerous, and I don't have time to come and see you, even though I really wanted to. If I had the ability, I would have stopped and gotten your help, because I know you'd always be there for me, just like I'm being there for you right now. Michael, you aren't going to believe this, but there's a man called Dark and Rawl who's trying to take over everything and use magic to rule over all of us. He plans to use this magic to kill a lot of people I care about, and I'm going to stop him. I've also got an awesome magic sword now, and Zed is actually a powerful wizard, so how about that? I also met a blind sorceress, and I think things might be getting serious with that woman you didn't get along with at the end of your speech. Get the army ready, and don't listen when they tell you they come in peace. I really wish I could have come to see you. I did everything in my power to want that to happen, but it just wasn't meant to be. Do your best, and hopefully I'll see you again. Your brother and your friend, Richard Cipher. P.S. Between here and the boundary, there was a bridge that looked to have been tampered with. We managed to get across safely, but it fell into the water shortly after we came across. Please send someone to look into that since the path is through the water. Somebody could get hurt. And immediately after reading such a thing, Michael would probably have had cuts on the inside of his palms from clenching his fists so hard. Not only was he trying his best, using the full might of the resources as first counselor to do it, his brother was still able to slip beyond his grasp. It's worse than Richard evading him on purpose. At least there would be dignity to that. But Richard wanted to see him and just didn't have a good opportunity to do it. It was dumb luck which stopped him from catching him before he left. His instructions to Chase are what a good symbol of integrity would give a good symbol of self-reliance. He tells Chase to gather all the tools he has, use all the training he has, and put those things to work to attack the problem head-on with skill and stick-to-itiveness. His instructions to Zed are what a good symbol of integrity would give a good symbol of pride when he says the wizard can find him through the symbolic representation of honesty found in the Nightstone, and that pride should understand being left behind when crossing over into a new and unfamiliar place inside the mind, that is, letting go of previously passionately held but self-destructive beliefs. AD does what a good symbol of honesty would do in this situation and says, buckle up, you're about to see some serious shit. It's time for the official #1 quote from Seeking the Truth About the Sword of Truth in Wizard's First Rule, Chapter 17. Please note that the views and opinions of what the official #1 quote for this chapter is may differ from the views and opinions expressed by you about what your #1 quote for this chapter is. In the event that your #1 quote is different from the one mentioned here, please list your candidate for #1 quote in the comments below. And the official #1 quote is when AD says to Richard, "Everything be valuable under the right circumstances. To a man dying of thirst, water be more precious than gold. To a drowning man, water be of little worth and great trouble." In our next episode, Richard and Kahlan travel into the past and start to encounter all sorts of dark and nasty things which live inside it. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you feel like you found honesty, strength, and connection in this video, please like and subscribe to the channel. Subscriptions help me. If you found something that helped you, I ask that you share a link to this video with those you wish to have that help. If those feelings are not there yet, I invite you to come back for the next episode and give me a chance to try and change your mind. Thank you for watching. My name is Tom, and I've been your guide. This has been Seeking the Truth About the Sword of Truth. Come and join me next time, so while I am seeking those truths, you can become seekers of that truth as well. Thank you. I hope to see you again.